is just a few nanometer, and that is stapes bone. And we have a couple of live surgeries here today. We'll have intense discussions with these masters on various aspects of the stapes surgery, right from the diagnostic workup till complications and how to handle them. We have already, a lot of people had logged in earlier, and we have already more than 400 people, 400 questions came to us regarding this stapes surgery. And today we have in our moderators, along with Dr. Rajiv Pachori, who is the mastermind behind this course, Dr. Rajiv Khanna, Dr. Sanjay Khanna from Karnal, who is a senior ENT specialist, and his academic orientation with so many accolades, awards, and so many publications. He is attached to most of the premier corporate hospitals in Delhi and Haryana. Thank you, sir, for being with us and making this event better and better. So, today we'll be starting with a live surgical demonstration of a case having conductive hearing loss. This diagnosis of otosclerosis is not always established before the surgery, unless you have operated upon the other ear. So diagnosis is mostly clinical, and we need to take help of certain investigations. We today will discuss in detail the role of radiology separately. And before we talk about the first case, who is a lady, 40-year-old lady, with a moderately severe conductive hearing loss bilaterally, I'll show the audiogram and tympanogram finding which we get done. This, are you getting some slide on the screen?
Yes, yes.
Ashim, boss, Ashish.
Yeah.
These are the listed investigations which are mentioned in the literature to help reaching the diagnosis of otosclerosis.
Yes.
Practically, we don't get all these investigations done. In our hearts on hearts, we all know.
Yes.
For the audience, I believe today, nothing to mention, these two guys are going to speak out of their heart. What they have seen in their life, what they have experienced, nothing something fabricated, nothing something, they are not going to speak anything which they don't know. So Ashish, honestly, when any case coming to you with an intact tympanic membrane and a conductive hearing loss, do you get all this list of investigation, or any investigation, or what investigation, to be very specific and precise?
Tuning fork is missing from this list, and honestly now by 30 years now we can actually smell an otosclerosis when they walk in. There is a certain way in which the patient speaks. There's a lot of clinical input that you get. The way when it's bilateral, of course, that the way their voice is very soft. One of the more important questions I ask them is when they are eating their food, is there increased difficulty in hearing? And if that is so, it sort of tells me towards a conductive loss. Sorry, I'm saying this.
Yes, yes.
And there's another thing that I've observed but not published because I'm not into publishing. A skin which looks like mine, a darkish Indian skin with light eyes. This is my observation. More often than not, these will turn out to be otosclerosis. So this, sorry,
yes, yeah, that is very important aspect, that you can have in your mind a sense of diagnosis as the patient comes to you that could be having otosclerosis. The way the patient speaks, the moment you have a look at a tympanic membrane with a hearing loss, and of course, like you mentioned, the tuning fork, and you put a Weber's and get a lateralized Weber's to the same side, it gives you a diagnosis. I have not mentioned tuning fork.
When they are crunching on the papad, it's the most difficult for them to hear the outside.
Yeah, but I am sure you are not getting all these investigation done, are you?
No.
Audiogram?
Yes, of course.
Any respect to the carrots nodes or any tympanogram or anything?
Early practice, I have had a problem with my audiologist giving unilateral SN loss as a conductive loss. I explored the child, and of course the chain was mobile. I put the thing, the eardrum back, and a repeat audiogram was done, and it showed sensorineural hearing loss. Now theoretically, I could have been in trouble because somebody would have said preoperatively there's a conductive loss, and now it's an SN loss, so created by you. So very, very important, unilateral conductive losses, be very, very careful, especially in children.
Yes. And the second thing you mentioned about the tuning fork.
Ashim,
I know Ashim uses tuning fork like anything.
Yes.
Ashim.
Yeah. So I would say that tuning fork is a preliminary and most important part of our surgical decision, because although your audiogram can tell you anything, if the tuning fork is not negative and the Weber is not moving towards the side that you choose to operate, one would choose not to regard the audiogram. Now, in my practice, I've been very fortunate to have two outstanding audiologists working with me. So I'm very, very confident with their audiogram. But having said that, each and every patient, I will subject him or her to a tuning fork test by myself and be sure that it is absolutely coordinating with the audiological findings. Along with this, to take the matter that Ashish spoke a little bit further, that when you have a large discrepancy between the test ear and the non-test ear, such as a large conductive or a large mixed loss and the other side showing mild SN loss or no loss, in those cases, narrow frequency insert masking, not just headphone masking, is the most important part. Because
you need to explain that, Ashim.
Yes. When you do a headphone masking, that's all right when you have a normal hearing ear on the other side. But if you have a moderate loss on the other side, the headphone will give you only 60 decibels of effective masking. Now, crossover occurs over 45 decibels. So, effective masking will not occur merely with a headphone. So for that, you need to use an insert masker. And insert
so the masking is important. That point is very well taken. The masking is important.
Yes, absolutely. Masking is, without a masked audiogram, you should not be operating. I will stick my neck out and say that. And you need 90 decibels of effective masking if your hearing loss has a sensory neural component of more than 40 dB or even a large conductive component. So insert masking is essential in the non-test.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah, that is important. So guys,
now
before we start, yes.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, please.
Yeah, please. Go on.
Coming to VEM, vestibular evoked myogenic potentials, this is a very important test when you are considering otosclerosis with ongoing Meniere's disease also. Sometimes bilateral mixed loss with vertigo.
No, the point is, this is in your routine test battery or not?
No, not routine. Sorry, not routine.
Okay.
Not routine.
So, before we go into the live surgery, this purposely we are discussing this diagnostic part, which is very, very important for half an hour with the CT scan as well. Yes, Ashish?
You speak a little bit on the impedance and the stapedial reflex.
Okay,
please.
that's what I was coming to. So first on the audiogram, like both of these guys said, the audiogram we always get done, and a very specific thing we always discuss in the audiogram is about the Carrett's notch. Carrett's notch is what? A depression in the bone conduction at certain frequencies, speech frequencies, sometime maybe 1K, mostly at 2K, sometime even at a 500. So what is that for the junior colleagues? This is not bone conduction loss, this is not inner ear loss, that is a loss in the bone conduction because of the fixation of the stapes, because of the conductive hearing loss, and that is not specific to the otosclerosis. It can happen to occur in other conductive hearing losses as well. So what happens, to be very, very clear, our bone conduction mechanism has three aspects. One is, as the sound strikes the skull goes in vibration, and those are the inner ear fluids as well. And that vibration in the inner ear fluids stimulates the cochlea. That is the main part of the inertial component. The second and third component of the bone conduction passes to the middle ear mechanism. What is that? What is these ossicles? These are bones suspended in the bone again. That is the skull. So their relative vibration to the skull, that relative inertia of the vibration of the stapes to the skull leads to movement of the perilymph, and that is conducted to the inner ear, and that component of inertial is a significant one which is lost in otosclerosis because the stapes is fixed. And second is, some of the sound passes through the external auditory canal vibrating the tympanic membrane and goes to the middle ear system. That again is lost. So that middle ear component which is lost is reflected as a Carrett's notch, that is loss in bone conduction in speech frequencies. So this is important to understand. Why I am mentioning, in spite of having bone conduction loss on the audiogram, as the stapes fixation is taken care of with the piston, this improves. So in spite of having done the surgery for the conductive hearing loss, air bone gap, still the bone conduction improves, and that is what the gain in bone conduction. So some of the patients having some loss in the bone conduction as well are still the very good candidates for the stapes surgery. It's not that those are having SNHL are not are good candidates for stapes surgery. So this leads to a phenomenon of overclosure. Overclosure means your bone conduction is improving, your air conduction is improving, and it looks like your air conduction, final air conduction is better than the previous bone conduction. So that is overclosure. The second, like Ashish asked, I will emphasize a little bit on the tympanogram and the stapedial reflex, that is known as, this test battery is known as impedance. I mentioned a little bit during the internal tympanoplasty case as well. Impedance is a very important investigation. So first of all, I'll take 5 to 10 minutes to tell you what is impedance. Why God has given us a middle ear. The middle ear has been interposed for the amplification of sound, the environmental sounds coming from the environment to the inner ear, going to the inner ear. The reason is, when sound travels in the environment, it has no resistance as it passes through the air. But as this sound passes to the cochlear fluid, which gives amazing resistance, the sound, most of the sound can get reflected back. And because of this middle ear transducer mechanism, as the sound is preferentially conducted to the ossicles and amplified to the level that majority of the sound passes to the inner ear fluids, and that's why we are able to hear. So that impedance matching mechanism, the middle ear is matching that impedance which is otherwise provided by the cochlear fluid to the other environment. From the air to the cochlear fluid, the sound which gets resistance, which gets impedance, is matched by the middle ear, and that is a function of impedance matching. So any middle ear pathology, suppose maybe to the ossicle, tympanic membrane, perforation, discontinuity, whatever, or otosclerosis, whatever happens to occur, leads to mismatch in the impedance and leads to conductive hearing loss. So this, to record this phenomena of impedance matching, is this test, impedance audiometry. And how you can do it simply by an instrument known as electroacoustic bridge. So this instrument has 3 components. What you need to do is, you have to put a probe in the ear which completely seals the external canal, and this probe has 3 components. One component gives a constant sound at a low frequency, 226 Hertz. The second component detects the sound. Whatever sound you give, it is reflected to the tympanic membrane because of the impedance of the system. And whatever reflected sound is calibrated by the other tool. That is electroacoustic bridge. That is taken by the second probe. And the third thing is connected to a manometer. So what do we record out of this? What do we want to record? Our middle ear, from the tympanic membrane to the stapedial foot plate, this impedance, it is matching. If this impedance has increased or decreased, it is recorded by this electroacoustic bridge. So whatever sound which is given by the sound probe, how much of it is being reflected is recorded, and that will give us a information of the impedance of the entire system. Now, to record this impedance, the criteria are very difficult. So the opposite of the impedance is admittance. Compliance, you can say. So if the compliance of the system is good, we will record it as a high amplitude. If the compliance of the system is low because of the impedance, maybe because of fixation of the stapes, fixation of ossicles, maybe because of tympanosclerosis, whatever, we will record as a low compliance, and this is the basis of impedance. Here in the stapes, because of the fixation of the otosclerosis, the impedance is increased, the resistance is increased to the sound transmission, and will find on audiometry, the tympanometry, as a low impedance curve type. There are a variety of curves defined because according to the compliance. The high one when there is ossicular discontinuity, and the low one when there is fixation. Could be because of any reason, and since this is otosclerosis fixing the final transmission of sound to the inner ear, that will reflect as a low impedance. The another aspect of this impedance test battery is the stapedial reflex. This is same. Again, we all know when the sound is transferred, it goes to the cochlear nuclei, from there to the superior olivary complex, and from there the efferent to the 7th nerve, the stapedius muscle is stimulated. And when the stapedius is stimulated, it increases the impedance to prevent the further sound transmission. That is a protective mechanism. So in order to test that, this impedance is again an important test by means of which we record the impedance exerted by the stapedius. So these are two tests which can give us a great idea about this diagnosis of autosclerosis. These are all adjuvant tests. There is no confirmatory test to diagnose autosclerosis so far before intraoperative exploration. But yes, if you have an audiogram saying a conductive hearing loss where your tuning fork is directed to the same side, as we always take up a case which has a worse hearing, so obviously the waveforms will reflect to the worse ear. Then the tympanogram with a typical type AS curve, which you may not get always. If the patient has a fixation of the stapes with a thin drum, you may not get the type AS curve. But yes, in a normal drum, you will get a classical type AS curve. This situation. This is important because in autosclerosis now the stapes is fixed. Even if the stapedius contracts, it will not be able to elicit the reflex, and that is classical of this. This is important because in any case, with even a conductive hearing loss, maybe low frequency loss or minimal loss or small loss, if the stapedial reflex is present, it 100% rules out autosclerosis. This is very, very clear. So certain tests are important to substantiate your diagnosis or to rule out your diagnosis. Yes.
Do you mind making a comment on the role of impedance in the post-operative period? When
not really.
Says,
not really.
Can you simulate by increasing the pressure?
Yes, a lot of people have tried by preserving the stapedius tendon.
No, not about the stapedius tendon. I'm asking post 2 months, 3 months, when the patient says, is it safe for me to fly?
Yes.
Can you do a simulated middle ear?
Okay, that's an amazing point by Ashish, which I will emphasize here, and that is important for everyone. That is always a question that can I fly? You know, a lot of patients ask when you do stapes surgery that, doctor, can I fly? Or when can I fly? Or it is important for the professional, you know, flyers and divers and so many things which are exposed to the pressure changes. So the, like Ashish mentioned, the test we take in our practice into consideration, which I believe is the best test to give them a clearance whether they can fly or not, is the tympanogram. The reason is, as I mentioned, in tympanometry we put a probe in the ear and hermetically seal it, and with a manometer we can increase or decrease the pressure. On those patients post-stapes surgery, if you really want to check whether they can fly or give them certificate in writing, you do a tympanometry test. What will it do? You raise the pressure by 400 millimeter or so. I will tell you why 400. Because at this pressure, the tympanic membrane becomes like a solid wall to prevent further pressure transmitting to the inner ear as a protective mechanism. So all the radial fibers of the tympanic membrane come into action, contract and make the tympanic membrane like a wall. So it doesn't mobilize anything further inside. And after that 400 pressure, if you still keep on reaching pressure, there will be no inward movement of any ossicle, anything. Otherwise, you know, if you exert 100 millimeter pressure, the tympanic membrane will go inside, the malleus will go inside, there will be gliding movement at the IS joint, and then the incudostapedial joint, and then the foot plate will go in. This is the normal mechanism. At 400, the tympanic membrane becomes a wall. It doesn't lead to any further movement of anything inside. And when you raise the pressure further above 400, there is no movement inside. So anybody
400, the patient has no weakness, the patient
so
can fly.
if the patient passes this tympanometry test at 400 pressure without any vertigo, he is fit to fly. As simple as that.
Perfect.
There is one more point here, that at 400 millimeters of water, you have a static inward displacement of the prosthesis by 0.5 millimeters.
Maximum.
So that is a maximum inward displacement.
Yes.
And therefore, if that elicits some form of vertigo, then you are sure that there is some problem.
Yes.
So that is one more point that you should know, that the static displacement also is very important.
Yeah. So see, this is the point from a master, that if this pressure, when the 400 millimeter of pressure is exerted, and as the stapes goes inside normally, now there is no stapes and there is piston, and piston has nothing to impede below. In a normal stapes situation, there is annular ligament to impede the further movement, you know. in the highest pressure situation, you know, I tell you the figures. Normally the stapes goes inward and out few nanometers. Maximum 30 nanometer for the maximum sound hearing. With 400 pressure, it can go up to 230 nanometer inside. Nanometer means 230 nanometer means 0.2 millimeter. With this piston now placed in place of the stapes where there is no annular ligament, it can exert more inward and outward movement, and like Dr. Hashim said, the piston can go in the extreme pressure situation up to 0.5 millimeter. So if the patient passes the tympanometry test where the piston is going even up to 0.5 millimeter and it is not pressing on vestibular end organs, not giving any vertigo, that means he is fit to fly.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That should be very clear. Then the other test, before we move on to the CT scan, the VAMP, like Dr. Hashim said, VAMP is generally not required. This is required, I will tell you, to differentiate from one condition, that is superior canal dehiscence. We'll see in radiology, I will show you what it is. So VAMP is what for everyone? Vestibular evoked myogenic potential. So when the sound is transferred to the ear, as the footplate goes in, when the saccule is stimulated, the vestibulo-colic reflexes elicit the movement in the muscles in the neck, potentials in the neck, and that you can record through an electrode inserted in the sternomastoid muscle. And if you get those myogenic potentials in the stapes, they are classically absent because of the conductive hearing loss. If you find a VAMP, that too on a very low threshold, that rules out otosclerosis 100%.
Yes.
Got my point again? Like stapedial reflex, if you elicit, there cannot be otosclerosis. Similarly, if the VAMP is coming at a normal threshold, it cannot be otosclerosis. And if VAMP is coming at a low threshold, higher stimulation, that looks like something is like a third window lesion in the inner ear, like superior canal dehiscence. So these tests are important to rule out, to differentiate, or to do a differential diagnosis with other lesions. OAE, otoacoustic emissions, reflect the function of the outer hair cells. Again, in the conductive hearing loss, the OAE is absent. So if you still find OAE, it rules out otosclerosis. And again, if the patient has a OAE present, if the patient has a VAMP at a low threshold, all these are a stapedial reflex present, you have to do radiology and rule out other inner ear lesion like superior canal dehiscence. So the whole idea behind this test battery is to reach to correct diagnosis. They all help you reaching correct diagnosis to avoid a misdiagnosis. Still the final diagnosis will be on the table. And more than that, if you see the histopathological studies on the temporal bone, on those patients who are operated for otosclerosis, who had a fixed foot plate, wherein the surgeon placed the piston, good hearing, everything went off well. And a post-mortem temporal bone study, histopathological study is done, and you will be amazed to know not more than 40% of those patients are having true otosclerosis. There are so many other systemic diseases which result in stapes fixation, giving the same clinical condition like otosclerosis. So it is not always the stapes fixation is otosclerosis, but yes, most commonly it is otosclerosis. It can be fixed because of other systemic diseases as well. Not many other, connective tissue diseases and all that lead to stapes fixation.
Satish,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Sanjay Khanna.
Yes, boss. Please.
Yeah.
Boss, feel free
there
to
are few
interrupt me
questions,
anytime.
if you can take few questions.
Yes, please.
Suppose there is a conductive hearing loss at low frequencies and normal in higher frequency. So what is your suggestion in that?
Conductive hearing loss in the low frequencies
And normal hearing at higher frequencies.
yes, so that is something we were discussing. A conductive hearing loss, particularly in the low frequencies, you have to be suspicious about certain other lesions and you need to rule out. You need more test battery. That's how I listed this test battery to rule out those conditions. Like for example, many of the patients of otosclerosis have a subclinical endolymphatic hydrops, which is not clinically manifesting by means of vertigo or any other symptoms. And they have subclinical hydrops, and they present with a low frequency conductive hearing loss. They are not truly otosclerosis, maybe having otosclerosis associated with eye drops as well. And if you don't rule out this before surgery, you may have a disaster later on. Like for example, many a times we have seen no surgeon on this planet has seen untoward complication in stapes surgery. Everything went up well, you inserted the piston well, everything you come out well, and you finally, the patient develops a sensory neural hearing loss. Because there are certain uncontrollable regions, uncontrollable factors beyond your visibility, beyond your control. And I will mention in my radiology talk after this that how you can even pick up such subclinical lesions by means of radiology. So those dubious lesions with conductive hearing loss in the lower frequencies, you have to rule out a subclinical eye drops where by means of radiology I will tell you, and some other tests as well, like electrocochleography, and you have to rule out the test things like superior canal dehiscence or any other third window lesion. So
also, I think the condition of the tympanic membrane, I doubt whether, that would probably, it's a old something that has gone wrong.
We are assuming as a normal intact tympanic membrane, Ashish, in that situation. So Ashim, would you give any special attention to those patients, like Dr. Sanjay Khanna has asked, having low frequency conductive hearing loss, selective low frequency up to 2000 say?
In these cases, I would re-look at the masking of the audiometry.
Yes.
Look at my Rinne and Weber's right up to 1024. And the third one is that for 150% such cases, I would consider imaging with the very close windows to make sure that there's no superior semicircular canal dehiscence in such cases.
Okay.
And
so
finally,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Come, carry on.
And finally, if there is even a slight mixed component, I will also do a speech discrimination score on that time. That also a mass speech discrimination score.
Great. So that is important. You need to do a proper masking for those patients. And more than that, I have certain regions to warrant a radiology in those situations. So Ashim, I am a strong proponent of advocating radiology for every patient. For that region, I will tell you, there are many reasons to it. In your practice, I know you are not getting CT scan done, honestly, in every patient.
Not in every patient.
Ashish, you as well.
Yes.
For which patient you are advocating CT scan, for that matter, for the audience?
All of the above. The special situations of children, mixed hearing loss, vertigo, tinnitus, doubt on diagnosis, all of the above require CT scanning, as well as unilateral severe conductive losses. Those also will be subject to CT scanning irrespective of their age.
Revisions?
And always revisions, without exception.
You know why I'm asking? We had this, we learned this lesson from our event Stapes Carnival. Ashish, you remember?
Yeah.
That time we didn't get all patients CT scan done. And 3 patients, we had gushers. Yeah. And all those 3 patients were below 20 years.
Yes.
They had conductive hearing loss. They had, like Dr. Sanjay Khanna asked, a predominant conductive hearing loss in the lower frequencies.
Right.
We missed the diagnosis as we didn't have CT scan for those patients. And finally we got the post-op CT scan done. And then we had to cut a sorry figure. We got the gushers in those patients which could have been avoided by means of having a CT scan. That's the value. So we learned that lesson, like Ashim said, in children. All patients below 20, CT gives useful information in terms of not only ruling out all these. The juvenile otosclerosis is very common. And you know, in juvenile otosclerosis, it is mostly associated with very commonly associated with the obliterative kind of lesion. And a good CT scan can give you pre-op information that this particular patient has obliterative otosclerosis, and you have to be accordingly prepared with that. You have to be accordingly taking consent from the patient for that, as those patients are not having that good result as other patients. So imaging is one aspect we always emphasize, and here I will take you.
Sir wants to say something.
Yes.
Satish, 2 things.
Yes, sir. Can you bring your mic closer, sir?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
One is when you're suspecting a superior semicircular canal dehiscence, look at the audiogram. The bone conduction is abnormally good. in these patients. You'll
Yes.
get bone conductions coming
Absolutely,
close.
absolutely.
That is
Absolutely.
one thing that puts you on guard, that a very good bone conduction.
Yeah.
And secondly, in a very young child, if you see mixed loss, where autosclerotic is not really to be expected, we've had patients with incomplete partition 3, where
Yes.
the inner ear is exposed to
Yes,
direct-
communication with the CSF space.
That's right, and that is where they
Yes.
have a big gap. So if you have a 3-year or a 4-year-old coming with a big mixed loss and it's
Yes.
showing a type A tympanogram, that means
Yes,
there's no
the same thing happened in Stepey's Carnival when Ashim was operating that case and he came across a sudden gush of perilymph. You remember, boss?
Yeah, was.
And that patient, we got the scan done later on and it was a X-link.
Yeah, so it's not really a perilymph gush, it's
Yeah.
CSF,
Yes.
So, you know what happens in those situations, like sir said, communication with the CSF space. There is a situation like a sort of inner ear hypertension. There is more pressure of fluid behind the foot plate because of communication, abnormal communication with the CSF space. And that extra pressure in the vestibule keeps the foot plate movement restricted. And when you get your audiogram done, it will give you a false impression of a conductive hearing loss. Got my point?
Yes.
That kind of a false impression of a conductive hearing loss in a situation of inner ear hypertension because of inner ear abnormal communication with the CSF space, if you don't have a radiology, can take you to the same situation like we had faced. And that was, had we been having a CT scan before, we would certainly avoid surgery in that patient. That was a lesson to us. So here,
One more question, Satish.
yes please, sir.
Just
Sir,
taking
you
an
feel,
example.
sir, you feel free to interrupt me anytime
Yeah.
as you are getting a lot of questions from the audience. Please.
Yeah. So there is a question related to the investigation audiogram.
Yeah,
A female patient with the age 40 years
yeah.
having a bilateral moderate mixed hearing loss with the air-bone gap of 15 to 20 dB. What is your take? And reflexes are absent. What is the take on this?
Can you repeat, boss? I sorry, I couldn't listen to it completely.
Okay. There's a patient, 40 years female,
Yeah.
with bilateral moderate mixed hearing loss
Okay.
with air-bone gap of 15 to 20 dB,
Yeah.
and reflexes are absent.
Hmm.
And how to proceed for this? What do you suspect in this?
See, bilateral mixed loss in a 40-year female. Obviously, the tympanic membrane must have been normal.
Yeah, obviously it is normal.
Yeah. I would advocate a CT scan. That's what I am coming to. The reason for getting a CT scan, for what? I need a CT scan. These patients with
Maybe
a,
chances
secondly,
of advanced otosclerosis.
Secondly, I would definitely confirm with my tuning fork. See, in spite of whatever audiogram I am getting, I would always do a tuning fork before establishing a diagnosis of otosclerosis. So, in spite of having a mixed loss, I will get a good Rini negative. In spite of having almost equal loss, even a 5 dB difference, I will get a Weber lateralized, and that will substantiate my diagnosis as well. And in all these mixed losses, like I mentioned in the previous slide, like Dr. Ashim mentioned, his particular indications, I am irrespective of anything getting CT scan done, but his indication is very specific in a mixed hearing loss. That will give us a lot of information about the etiology of the mixed loss as well, if some part of the inner ear is involved. Ashim, you do anything differently?
No, absolutely not. I completely agree with you that when you say 15 and 20 dB of airborne gap, as Dr. Khanna said, then Rene and Weber become even more important than ever before. And
Yes.
And to suppose, assuming that it still appears to be otosclerosis, your CT scan is all right with that, and assuming that your Weber is not very specific, then you would do a speech discrimination and operate on the better side.
See, that is important. Before proceeding for the surgery, this master's word as a speech discrimination is, to me, is essential. This is something will really give you a true idea of the overall quality of hearing the patient is going to gain. Whatever audiometry say, max hearing loss, mixed hearing loss, if the patient speech discrimination is poor, if it is below 50, you have to think twice before doing a STP surgery, because you have to tell your patient the prognosis. In spite of doing a mobilizing by means of putting a piston, you may not get a good hearing result in terms of hearing for practical purpose. Boss, anything you want to add on?
No, please go ahead now. We are already at 11 o'clock here.
Yes, yes. So Ashish, we are not in hurry. Our aim is to discuss all these things, huh?
But 4 surgeries, no? Okay.
Yes. So what I was trying to say, the imaging, the role of imaging. The reason is, imaging not only gives you, take you to the right diagnosis, that reaching to the diagnosis, the role of imaging is minimal. Imaging is not directed to diagnose otosclerosis, what I mean to say. Sometimes you may not get any otosclerotic foci. You may find absolutely normal high resolution CT scan of the temporal bone, yet patient may be having otosclerosis. So role of imaging, obviously sometimes you may get a diagnosis, but the role of imaging is different. The role of imaging is to get anatomical details, is to give us anatomical information which may make our surgery otherwise difficult. It gives us information in sort of giving contraindications to surgery, so many information, and overall it prevents you from cutting a sorry figure many a times. So the imaging, first of all, what kind of imaging we should order in those situations. So imaging, what we order in this situation is a high resolution CT scan of the temporal bone. Fine slice. Nowadays we are getting more and more cone beam CT scan where we can get a thin slice up to 0.05 mm of the structures. This particular yes, 0.05 mm with a cone beam. Cone beam is an amazing technology wherein the CT scan can be done even in the sitting position with hardly any radiation exposure. According to the literature, the overall radiation exposure is 16 times less than a regular CT scan. And many of the countries it has been advocated to be, done even in the pregnant ladies, because there is hardly any radiation exposure. And more than that, there is no artifact. That's why it was introduced in the dental, field to prevent the artifacts coming into picture. So cone beam in that respect is much better, but though you can't do contrast studies and other things with a cone beam, but for a regular high resolution CT scan, the cone beam is best. So a good, high resolution CT scan is required so that you can see each and every point. Now the question is, you remember Ashish, when Kirti sir conducted a panel of the LChem,
yes,
I sent afterwards a protocol of imaging, our protocol, to see the things in imaging, that is to be given to the radiologist. That give this proforma so that they can fill this, and believe me, we had given that proforma to the radiologist having more than 100 points. They refused. They can't spend more than 2 hours to fill that proforma for bloody reporting a CT scan temporal bone, and nobody. So the ultimate thing falls upon the surgeon only, that we need to know how to read that CT scan ourselves, to acquire that information dynamically and in terms of distances and everything on our own, which radiologists otherwise cannot provide. Because if you get a radiologist report in such CT scan, they will report as a normal CT scan temporal bone, which is of no value.
Yeah.
So what kind of CT scan we need? Yes, phone aaya. So are you getting the picture of the CT scan?
Yes.
Yes.
This is the axial CT scan 0.5 mm, and what I am trying to show you, to start from above to below, we will be discussing in our forthcoming webinars about the CT scan of the temporal bone again and again, but relevant to that particular pathology. So today I am showing the CT scan of the temporal bone in perspective of otosclerosis, nothing else. I am not showing in perspective of CSOM or tumors or anything. What all you need to see in relation to otosclerosis. Simple, as simple as that.
Yeah.
बंद करना है इसको, कौन फोन कर रहा है? Yes. So if you go from above downwards, see the first structure what you come across, we all know. What is this? That is superior semicircular canal.
Yeah.
That's what we were discussing. We got the first question today from Dr. Kusum Patidar, about the third window lesions can you highlight? So this superior semicircular canal is one structure we were discussing, like Kirtan sir mentioned. We need to see whether this canal is dehiscent or not. Now the first question is, can we get to know by this scan? This is axial scan. We are coming from above downwards. Imagine the patient is lying in the same plane in which we operate. And this is anterior to posterior, you get the information of structure like this. Okay. Now the superior canal which has gone above, to see the best picture of the superior canal, we have to reconstruct. See, now I am reconstructing it. Can you see? Now see where the superior canal and how to see it. And that, see, why I am showing this, the radiologist is not going to tell you at all. So, and you can miss the diagnosis. There are a lot of reports where the superior semicircular canal fistula was missed, patients were explored, found absolute normal mobile foot plate, abandoned the procedure, came back, and the patient had the same system persisting. Other scenario, patient were operated, explored, patient had a fixed foot plate. You know, Ashish, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Patient had a concomitant fixed foot plate along with the superior canal dehiscence. And you know what happened? Earlier, until the foot plate was fixed, patient was asymptomatic of the vestibular symptom because there were only two windows functioning. Because the stapes was fixed, patient had a superior canal dehiscence, one window, and the round window, other window. And there was no third window lesion because of the otosclerosis, the foot plate was fixed. And for that, patient was operated and the surgeon made the third window. And then the patient becomes symptomatic. You know, there are so many such reports where the surgeon made the patient symptomatic by creating a third window, which was a natural window, and missed the unnatural third window, that was superior canal dehiscence. So once there is superior canal dehiscence, see this coronal scan, can you see this coronal?
Yeah.
Now see my cursor, this is the vestibule.
Yeah.
This is the vestibule and there are three canals. This is lateral canal laterally, this is posterior canal behind, and this is superior canal going up. Can you see this going up?
Yeah. Nicely, yeah.
Keep an eye on the superior canal.
Yeah.
See, I am reverting it back.
Yeah.
There is a thick bone above it. Can you see this?
Yeah. Yes, nicely seen.
So
Beautiful.
if there is a thick bone above it, it rules out superior canal dehiscence. As simple as that. There is no other test. Clinically, yes, if you are suspicious of if you are very conscious about the patient's clinical history, like Ashish said in the morning, he can pick up his mind senses when the patient walks in that she has otosclerosis. So if we are very, very particular about the patient history in these patients, you know, their typical history, they have a history of occasional vertigo even with a loud sound. They have a history of occasional vertigo, you know, any point of time, and they have a tendency to hear their own sounds. You know, sometimes the patient complain that I can hear my eyes moving. You tap on their ankle and they will hear. That is oversensitivity to the bone conduction. If they eat something, they clench their teeth, they hear it very, very pronounced. And that is a classical symptom of this superior canal dehiscence you will find in those patients. Generally, we don't elicit this history in detail, and it has an immense role. Because if we miss this and explore this patient, we'll cut a sorry figure. And like Kirtan sir rightly said, why these symptoms are coming? Because of this lesion, their cochlea partition becomes more sensitive to the bone conduction. So even the patient, even in these patients, you tap on the lateral malleolus of the leg, the patient will hear immediately. That kind of oversensitivity to the bone conduction, and that reflects in audiogram as well. Like Kirtan sir said, these patients will classically have bone conduction in minus. Over good bone conduction, I have seen these patients having bone conduction, I have in our center having minus 15 dB bone conduction, and if you see, that is classically, you know, good enough to give you a suspicion of a third window lesion. So
there is a comment from Dr. Girish regarding this. If there is a superior semicircular canal dehiscence,
yeah,
they have autophony and sound induced vertigo also.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
he has just commented on this.
Yes, you can have this kind of feeling. And see, once there is superior canal dehiscence, I mentioned during the cadaveric dissection, you go by the, middle fossa approach. You have to remove the bone flap, and the moment you elevate the dura, you saw the prominence of the, superior canal
Arcuate eminence.
and the arcuate eminence, and there you will find dehiscence. What all you need to do is put some bone vest, fibrin glue, and some fascia and come out. That's it. It is such simple operation you can do even under local anesthesia in no time. So this was the first thing you need to see once you look at the CT scan. See, I told you CT is not really important to establish a diagnosis. I will show you certain pictures. In the first patient, this patient only where I am showing, I have a clear cut, focus on the fistula anterofenestrum in this patient. I will show that. Now before that, as you go down, now see, you need to look at the other canals as well. If there is any malformation in the other canal which may be leading to, or which may lead to vestibular problems later on. Now the more important is the intra-auditory meatus, like sir said, Kirtne sir. If there is any abnormal communication of the intra-auditory meatus with the inner ear in these patients, and if you have a CT scan and you pick up, that is a good enough indication to abandon, to rule out the surgery and give a hearing aid and think of something else. So the intra-auditory canal, all dimensions of the intra-auditory canal must be seen. And intra-auditory canal, see this, the cochlear nerve where it enters the intra-auditory canal. This cochlear aperture dimension should be assessed thoroughly. Can you see this cochlear aperture?
Yeah.
This is where the cochlear nerve enters into the intra-auditory canal, and this same point, if you remember, I demonstrated in the temporal bone dissection, where the cochlear nerve forms and enters into the intra-auditory meatus. This is the point. If you remember this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is where the cochlear nerve. And see, with your CT scan, you can easily measure the dimension of the cochlear aperture. See this, 1.67 millimeter. If it is more than 2 or 2.2 or something like that, like Kirtne sir said, this is a direct communication, suggesting that there could be a direct communication between the intra-auditory canals and the cochlea, and that can lead to gusher, and in those situations the STP surgery is contraindicated. So there are so many things which your CT scan can really prevent you from going to those problems. Same with the vestibule. There is a situation called enlarged vestibular aqueduct syndrome. Again, what happens in that? Because of the inner ear hypertension situation, because of the enlarged vestibular aqueduct, many of these patients present with low frequency conductive hearing loss. And again, if you don't look at the vestibule and the vestibular aqueduct, again you fall in a misdiagnosis and you can open up those patients. Got my point?
Yeah.
So see, look at the dimension of the vestibule and the vestibular aqueduct. At this point, you see this is the vestibular aqueduct. You see if it is dilated, or look at the vestibule. If it is dilated, then you have to think twice before taking such patient for surgery. Now, cochlea. See this modulus in the cochlea. If it is defective, this is what exactly Kirtne sir said in the morning. If this modulus is defective, it shows there is a direct communication. And Ashim, boss, that was the patient, our patient. Yes. There's a carnival with a gusher and a defective modulus. It was IP3 actually. It was X-linked syndrome, which led to inner ear hypertension, conductive loss, and we operated. And I got the scan done later. And for that patient, after a year or so, she had a complete hearing loss, and we had to do a cochlear implantation in that patient. And she's doing well now. So, the other thing you need to see, the course of the facial now. See, this is the labyrinthine segment. Yes. Can you see? That's the first genu.
Yes.
That is the tympanic segment. See this tympanic segment?
Yes.
See this tympanic segment? This is the mastoid segment. Why I am showing this? This is a very important situation, because this can lead to overcrowding of the over window of the facial nerve with dehiscent and falling down. And if you don't know pre-operatively and para-operatively, if you come across a situation like dehiscent facial nerve, prolapsing facial nerve, again you have to think twice before operating those patients, unless you are very good. If such patient come to Ashim Desai, we will operate, he will do so many maneuvers, we will come to know from you boss today later on what you can all do in those situations. But if you get it as a surprise, then it's a big problem, particularly to a surgeon who is not very experienced. But by means of CT scan, you can get to know exactly how your relationship between the overriding facial nerve, the horizontal facial nerve and the oval window. So how you can see? Not on this scan. Again, in CT scan, we should know what plane can give you best information. What structure can be seen best in what plane. What my point? So here I will show 3D reconstruction, coronal again, and then you see very quickly the relationship of the oval window and CT scan. See, so simple. So simple. Let me show you first where the oval window is. Can you see the ossicular chain? Look at the ossicular chain. See the malleus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now see the incus?
Yes.
Long process of the incus? And see the stapedial suprastructure and where they are heading to? This oval window. See this oval window? This is the vestibule in the depth. And see what is there in the above the oval window? Can you see this small structure?
Yes, the facial nerve.
Just facial nerve. Now in this coronal section upside down, imagine had this facial nerve been here down
Overing.
over the oval window, would you take the such patient for surgery? You have to tell them that you may have to abandon this. If the patient agrees, then you can take a call. Experienced surgeon like you can always do this by doing various maneuvers, by mobilizing, going even above or below the facial nerve. But yes, if you are not aware of this situation and find it as an intraoperative surprise, is a big problem. And then you may have to take...
Many time canal is dehiscence also here.
Yeah, many a time horizontal segment canal dehiscence is very common. Microdenses are very common. And once facial nerve is prolapsing, that is obviously going to be dehiscent only, then only it can prolapse, you know.
Yeah.
So this situation on this coronal CT scan, if you find this facial nerve lying below in the line of the oval window, that is something giving you a direct idea that your facial nerve is prolapsing. Now you have to take a call on your own. Okay?
Yeah.
What about gushers preoperatively? If we can see on CT scan, there are
Yes.
too many questions.
Yes. So I have already mentioned for the gushers, number one, if you have a dilated intra-auditory canal, if you have a big, cochlear aperture more than 2.2 millimeter, if you have a dilated vestibule, if you have a dilated vestibular aqueduct, and some people theoretically call it, let me show you. See, this is the cochlear round window and this is the cochlear aqueduct. Though this has never given a gusher. The most of the work I have gone through, I have seen and read and discussed. The majority of the work, the extensive work on this cochlear aqueduct is done by Professor Robert Jackler. His publications, mind-blowing publication on cochlear aqueduct, enlighten us what exactly it is. There are a lot of myths involved with it. Not a single case of gusher till date actually is attributed to the cochlear aqueduct. For example, that is always a myth. Because whatever, in spite of having a dilated cochlear aqueduct, it is filled up with a mesh of fibrofatty tissue, which doesn't directly, transfer the CSF pressure to the inner ear to give it a gusher. This is always a myth. But yes, if it is dilated, you can see on CT scan, this can be a source of communication of infection from the intracranial space to the inner ear or from inner ear to the intracranial space for that matter. And this is the principal source of, meningitis transferred to the inner ear through the cochlear aqueduct to give it the situation of labyrinthine ossificans. That is the responsible thing. That is cochlear aqueduct.
Satish, there is a question from Dr. Pushkaraj,
Yeah,
Mumbai.
yeah.
How to see persistent stapedial artery or aberrant ICA?
Yes, I am coming to it. So I am coming from above downward. This is all relevant. This is very important, valid question.
Yeah,
That's why you need CT scan.
CT scan.
I remember Ashish's case last year, and we have a picture today as well, when he came across a case of persistent stapedial artery. In our practice, I have seen only 2 cases so far. I don't know Ashim, his figure is 6,000 plus, how many times he has seen the persistent stapedial artery. But this is rare, and this is a small vessel, you know, a tiny. Boss, how many stapedial arteries you have seen?
4.
4. Great. So, this CT scan, like somebody asked the question about the persistent stapedial artery. This CT scan cannot pick up the artery as such, but it can give you enough evidence, ample of evidence that patient might be having persistent stapedial artery. The reason is we need to understand the embryology of this vessel. This vessel, in brief, I'll tell you, this vessel is a branch of dorsal hyoid artery in the embryo, which is the principal artery in the embryo, like external carotid in the adult. And at some point of time, around 10 weeks of the embryo or so, this vessel runs over the promontory, goes towards the stapes, and at the 10th week of embryo, as the stapes arch starts developing, the obturator foramen of the stapes develop, this vessel gets absorbed. And there is no more stapedial artery, and this leads to formation of future middle meningeal artery. Now in those patients where this vessel doesn't get absorbed.
Allow me, I'll say this is the magic. Why is the stapes, the shape of it is an arch?
Yes.
It's because of the obturator foramen.
Where this vessel passes.
Only artery in the body in the embryonic age where the direction of the flow changes magically from the internal carotid to the external, and then it changes. This is something very, very magical. This happens between 5 weeks to 10 weeks in the embryonic life. And this is why, and it goes more, ultimately it exits just posterior to the cochleariform process. Therefore, the anterior crust tends to be a little thinner because the artery is positioned more anteriorly.
Yes, yes,
Between
that is
the anterior crust and posterior crust. Go ahead.
super. See, that's how embryology is important. So normally this artery gets absorbed, leads to future meningeal artery, and we don't see this artery persistent in a normal individual. Now, if this artery persists, it passes through that stapedial arch, then enters the facial canal, and then through the facial canal it goes intracranial and destined to supply certain intracranial structures. So, in case this artery is persistent, we may not be able to see this artery passing on the promontory. That's a small vessel, and that is a soft tissue. We may not be able to pick up on CT scan. But what we can pick up in that situation, if the artery is passing through the facial canal, the dimension of the horizontal facial canal would be more than the usual. See, this is horizontal facial canal. In any given patient, when you are suspecting otosclerosis, having this dilated horizontal facial canal, dilated more than double, gives you suspicion that there could be a persistent artery passing through it, number 1. Number 2, as I said, it leads to future middle meningeal artery. Once this artery passes or persists, there is no middle meningeal artery as such. And in that situation, on CT scan, very easily you can pick up, see this.
The foramen spinosum.
Yes.
Spinosum is absent.
Yeah. So where is foramen spinosum for everyone? This is the pterygoid process. This is the pterygoid process. Behind the pterygoid process is the foramen ovale, and then behind that is the foramen spinosum. So when this artery is persistent in the adult, there is no middle meningeal artery, and there is no foramen spinosum through which the artery can pass through, and that is a good enough indirect evidence that patient might be having a persistent stapedial artery. We'll discuss later whether we can do anything to it or not, but here on the radiology, this is relevant. That question was relevant, that how to pick up a persistent stapedial artery. Then we have already discussed about the inner ear and all these findings, if there are any, the facial nerve, if there are any prolapse, and secondly, the ossicular chain. Like we will get to know from Ashim, he has a huge experience of fixation of the malleolar ligament. In otosclerosis, because of the fixation of the ossicular chain, it is not uncommon to see hyalinization and fixation of the malleolar ligament, contributing further to the conductive hearing loss. Why it is so important? Because even if you improve the stapedial fixation, If you ignore that fixation of the malleus ligament, the conductive hearing loss will persist. Now, you can pick up intraoperatively by checking the mobility of the malleus thoroughly. If you are good experienced, you can pick up even the slightest fixation of the malleus ligament, and that we will learn from this master today, how to exactly check the mobility of the malleus ligament. But if you are not very experienced, you can have a very good idea of the malleolar ligament fixation on the CT scan. Couple of times we have seen the malleolar ligament completely ossified, and we picked up on a CT scan where the malleus was fixed and the reason for conductive hearing loss along with the stapedial fixation. So see in the ATIC, can you see the malleus and incus?
Yes.
There are three ligaments which are important to us for that matter. One is anterior malleolar ligament, one is superior malleolar ligament, and third is posterior incudal ligament. All three ligaments around, if they are ossified and fixing in the ATIC, you can have a very good idea. Can you see in a normal situation these ligaments will not be visible on CT scan unless they are hyalinized and ossified. So see this, it looks like these two ossicles are suspended in the ATIC without any connection, and that is the normal situation you need to see on CT scan. See the malleus anteriorly, where would be the anterior malleolar ligament? Anterior to it, going towards the anterior ATIC. Okay, and this ligament passes anteriorly, I mentioned in the cadaver, through that passes further anteriorly through the Glacerian fissure, under which the chorda tympani passes through the canal of Usier. So this is the site of the anterior malleolar ligament. How to see the superior malleolar ligament? To see the superior malleolar ligament, you have to go to the coronal picture. See the coronal picture? Yes. See this. See the incus, see the malleus in the ATIC?
Yeah.
Very clear? If there is superior fixation of the malleus in the ATIC, you can get to know very easily with bony fixation, and I have seen 7 or 8 cases in my practice where I have found the malleus fixation superiorly in the ATIC, and you can very easily get to know on a very good high resolution CT scan. And if this information is having in your mind pre-op, you know the implications. Many a times to go on to the superior limit of the malleus in the ATIC, you have planned a transcanalicular surgery, transmeatal surgery, and then you may have to go post-oral. You may have to go post-oral. So you can plan your surgery better, you can counsel your patient better that you may need a post-oral incision. Dr. Ashim does the same thing with the mini endoral. That is the advantage of mini endoral incision, boss, you are doing. You can go with the same incision to the ATIC as well. But this is something, if you know pre-op, it is always good. See, if we know our diagnosis well, by means of taking advantage of the radiology, we can, certainly avoid all these intraoperative surprises. That is the goal of, radiology. If you agree with me or not, I would like to have your opinion.
No, brilliant. Absolutely, there's no question.
So all these things you can get to know. The carotid artery, like sir asked the question. See, this is horizontal carotid. Can you see?
Yeah.
This is the cochlea. We saw in the dissection how intimate they are in relationship.
Yeah.
The cochlea and the carotid. If this partition is gone, bony partition, this acts as a third window.
Yes.
Leaking the current from the inner ear, acting as a third window. Again, if you don't have a diagnosis of this, is a disaster again. So third window lesion is not always superior canal dehiscence. Anywhere this inner ear current is leaking, example I tell you, enlarged vestibular aqueduct can behave as a third window. This dehiscence carotid can act as a third window. Any semicircular canal dehiscence can act as a third window. Any cochlear dehiscence anywhere can act as a third window. And more importantly, I have seen a case where we did a cochlear implantation, had an extreme cochlear otosclerosis. And the cavitation of the cochlear otosclerosis was communicating to the interauditory meatus, acting as a third window. So third window can be because of many reasons. Only thing, by means of radiology we can pick up. And more importantly, now I will come to the diagnosis. In the last, I told you this is of least value. I have not told you anything about the stapes and the oval window and all those things so far. Yes. Now see, Now see if I am coming from above downwards. This is the horizontal facial.
Yeah.
Below the horizontal facial, this is the vestibule. Can you see?
Yes.
And can you see the stapedial arch?
Yes.
The anterior and posterior crest, can you see?
Very nicely, yeah.
See this? By this CT scan, you can have a fairly good idea how thick would be your foot plate, number one. See, this is so important for a beginner. It may not be important for a master like Ashim Desai and Ashish, because they have been doing a lot of obliterative stapes surgery done. If he gets an obliterative, he will start drilling and give the same result, believe me, which everybody cannot. So the idea is, if we have this pre-op information, this has a strong influence, a strong impact on the overall outcome. Because if you have an obliterative autosclerosis, the results cannot be as good as in a blue foot plate. Except the exceptions are there. If you are so good, like Ashim, I have seen him, he did in Jaipur, in the, Stapes Carnival, I remember that patient, had a complete obliterative autosclerosis. He took 2.5 hours, drill each and every part of the autosclerotic foci, and then made a fenestra, put a piston, and that patient is till date having absolute closure of the airborne gap. That was a master section. But believe me, it is so difficult, it is not all that easy to drill away the obliterative foci. So, if you know this information on radiology, that your foot plate is too thick, obliterative, this is a good enough evidence to warn your patient about the results. Think twice before taking up that case. You can refer to a more experienced one, or you can advocate a patient a hearing aid, if you can't do that. So this thickness of the foot plate.
Question, Dr. Satish.
Yes, boss.
Yes, sir. Sorry, carry on, please.
Yeah. So this thickness of the foot plate can be assessed based on the cone beam CT scan. I mentioned 0.05 mm. We have seen on cone beam, measure the thickness of the foot plate, that it is 0.3 mm thick, and intraoperatively we observe the same thing, how thick the foot plate is. And if you, Ashish, if you have this information that your foot plate is 2 mm thick, and if you know it before, won't it change your approach and counseling to the patient?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
See, this is so important. The second thing what you need to look at the oval window here, the integrity of the stapedial arch. Can you see the entire stapedial arch?
Yes.
And the incudostapedial joint in this dynamic CT scan?
Yeah.
So good. The entire information you get. Now the most important thing.
In revision surgery, this becomes an important.
Yeah. Now the most important thing I am going to show you. This is your vestibule. This is your foot plate. Can you see this hypodensity anterior to it?
Yeah.
Why I am saying so? See the contrast of the hypodensity. The bone of the cochlea, this otic capsule is so bright. Can you see?
Yeah.
And this part of the otic capsule where the autosclerosis starts, the fistula antefenestrum.
Yes.
What is autosclerosis? Where the thick enchondral bone of the otic capsule is replaced by this spongy bone.
Yes.
More vascular bone, more hypodense bone, and you see the difference in hypodensity. That is what the beginning of the autosclerosis is. Can you perceive it very clear or not?
Very, very nice.
Yes, very nice.
You may not see always, because you may not see always. This is so important. In a patient we are suspecting autosclerosis. Now this patient, I am suspecting clinically autosclerosis. I have already told before exploration there is no 100% test to diagnose autosclerosis. But now with this kind of a CT scan and corroborative audiological finding, I can be very much sure that this patient is autosclerosis. That's how it helps. Now more than that, this autosclerosis of the fistula antefenestrum, even in a patient with a full fixation of the foot plate, you may not find this foci so big. Absolutely normal you may find. The reason is how the autosclerosis starts. You know, if you go through the Shuknet's book, Shuknet was, you must be knowing the Shuknet, the great autopathologist. He wrote so many books on the pathology of the temporal bone only. 1000 pages book on the pathology of the temporal bone. Amazing. And what he found, this autosclerosis foci starts here at the fistula antefenestrum, very small foci, and yet can it give a hearing loss. How come? the moment this foci starts forming at the anterior end of the foot plate, it pushes the foot plate behind, you know, and the foot plate gets fixed posteriorly at the posterior stapediovestibular joint. What's my point? As the foci pushes the foot plate behind, the foot plate gets fixed at the posterior stapediovestibular joint. Got my point?
Yes.
Not true annular ligament fixation, and yet you can get conductive hearing loss up to 30 dB or so. That's why we don't generally advocate stapes surgery in minimal airborne gaps. You know why? Because in that situation your foot plate may not have been adequately fixed. Your annular ligament may not have been adequately fixed. This could be because of this foci at the fistula anterior fenestrum which have pushed the foot plate behind and fixed the posterior stapediovestibular joint. And such a case with an airborne gap, say 20 to 30 dB, if you take up for surgery with your regular instrument, where the foot plate is not completely fixed, what can happen? Floater. Easily floater.
Yeah.
So
And that is
every...
why one point is
Yes.
that in general, when you are trying to enlarge the opening, it should never be done by picking at the posterior part of your fenestra, for the simple reason that the posterior pole is impacted. There are larger chances of making it fully mobile.
Yes.
When you are enlarging it, you should always do it at the expense anterior.
But boss, generally, I want to ask one thing. That's a very important point from him. Very practical. Don't go too posteriorly, otherwise you'll get a floater easily. But
Yes.
boss, generally, we don't advocate making a fenestra anteriorly because of float crossing.
Enlargement of the fenestra.
Enlargement. You are always making the enlargement in the posterior third of the foot plate. I mean,
Okay.
the fenestra.
Okay.
But assuming that you need to enlarge it, it should be done anteriorly. That
Okay.
micro enlargement, micro cleaning up of the bony fragments, so on and so forth, should be done anteriorly.
Satish, I also want, you mentioned about the pathology. There is a beautiful network site, autopathology.network.org. This is run by Harvard. I think
Okay.
I strongly recommend people go and see this. It's brilliant.
Okay,
Can you
great.
repeat, please?
Autopathology.org.
Autopathology.network.org.
Great.
Yeah, it's
So boss,
for-
Ashim,
Satish,
Ashim and Ashish, I want a question from you. I want to ask you something here.
Yeah.
Patient, like I mentioned that these are early airborne gap patients up to 20-30 decibel with incomplete fixation of the foot plate at the annular ligament level all around, which can give to floater. What is your indication for advocating surgery to these patients? When you advocate, stapes surgery, at what hearing loss level in terms of AB gap?
AB, yeah.
Let Ashim take over.
So this question has come from many of us, from the viewers.
Okay,
same
so the
question.
answer to that would be in the region of about 30 dB is when I would pick it up. But the most important part once again is the Rene. Until the Rene turns negative, whatever the audiogram says, I will not take up for surgery. But yes, typically 30 would be the bare minimum. There have been instances when people have virtually pushed for even smaller airborne gaps for surgery for social reasons, whatever may be the reason. And in those cases, it is imperative to have a laser available because the chances of developing a floater is extremely high when physically manipulating the foot plate.
Now we are having lasers.
Yes.
You are also having laser.
Absolutely.
Won't you advocate surgery to them having laser and ensure
Not till Rene is
now
negative.
by means of laser you can almost 100% ensure that you are not going to give floater?
Absolutely, absolutely, but not till it's Rene negative.
But still, Satish, the anterior crura, it's not just the fenestra. The
Yeah.
anterior crura is also a mechanical movement most of the times.
Yeah, so
So-
Ashish, with the lasers now the fiber is available.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
I agree.
even with the inaccessible location of the anterior crus and all that,
Yeah.
you
That's
can
how I
vaporize
have-
with the laser.
Yeah.
So now you can treat early lesions, with lesion not having shown complete fixation, not having shown so much of spread of the otosclerotic foci, and you can give good hearing in the beginning with the laser.
Yeah. I'm
So-
not sure whether 15 dB gap patient even wants to come to do
No,
surgery
not
or
15 dB. It's around
Yeah.
25 dB, I would say. 20 to 30 dB, not 15 dB. So this is about the oval window. Now the other thing you,
Satish,
Yes.
can we differentiate between the congenital fixation? Can we look at the annular ligament or its absence on a CT scan?
not really. Annular ligament cannot be seen on CT scan. And for your question about the congenital fixation,
Yeah.
yes, you are right. In congenital fixation, the annular ligament doesn't differentiate, you know.
Yeah.
And so there is a complete bony fixation of the foot plate to the oval window. Generally in the embryo, it differentiates into annular ligament where the foot plate becomes mobile.
Yeah.
So in that situation, you have to do a proper surgery in the congenital. There are two situations, congenital and juvenile autosclerosis. Both are different,
Yes.
you know.
So very different.
There has to be very clear this thing in the mind. Congenital are early presentation. Like I have a child, 4-year-old, maybe bilateral conductive hearing loss with autosclerosis. I have a patient, 10-year-old, 11-year-old with autosclerosis with family history. That cannot be congenital, that is juvenile.
Yes.
Congenital have no family history, early presentation,
Non-progressive. Yeah.
non-progressive at all, and they are good candidates for stapes surgery. We have some patients we have operated, not 4 years, but my earliest is 6 year I have operated, and absolute good result. Juvenile on the other hand are difficult, I tell you, because majority of the juvenile have obliterative focus.
And extremely vascular foci.
Yeah.
It's the bleeding occurs through the foot plate itself,
Through the
not
foot.
just the mucosa.
Yes.
So I have no experience with juvenile.
Juvenile is difficult, always difficult, and you have to have a full consent because of the future also, because you never know how durable are the results going to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now the
There
second
is
thing
a
you need to,
question, Satish,
yes please,
from the Deepak Dalmia.
yes, man,
In how many percentage of patients in your series of stapes surgery you have felt that imaging has changed your plan of action?
okay, that's very good. Deepak, I tell you, again I mentioned in the during the internal tympanoplasty also, that you do tympanoplasty by any technique, you will get 90% result or so. Taking from 90 to 99 requires a huge task. Same in autosclerosis. Your question is valid. 90% of the time you don't get any investigation. Like Ashish said, the patient comes to your OPD, you sense autosclerosis, you explore and you go correct. 90% of the time you go absolute correct without any problem. Now rest 10%. Out of those 10%, 5% are the situation, 5 to 6%, which complicates your surgical aspect, and that is the test of your experience. If you are not experienced, you may have to abandon those situations. And if you are experienced enough, you can tackle all those 6% situation and still you can carry out without hardly any change in the overall outcome. 2 to 3% of the time is the litmus test. And that is the time where your
These
this
courses are really,
Yeah.
really designed for that. It is
Yes.
that.
It is
so
Fine,
this
you
this
from
course
95
is
to
designed
99.
for that 2%, where your
Because
radiology.
it's about, let me convert the question into: would you do a FES surgery without a CTPNS?
Yes, same like that.
What changes? Nothing changes really.
So Ashish,
You know,
why this question comes?
want.
Why this question comes? Because 90% times you get away without any issue, and then the surgeon will say, "Why are you spending time and money in CT scan and talking all these fancy things?"
And being forewarned is
You know,
forearmed. So that is the.
You know, Ashish, this is one surgery. Believe me, the most fascinating surgery, but at the same time, if anything goes wrong, gives you the
all or
highest
none.
level of
It's all or
depression.
none phenomenon.
All or none. You can 95% of the time you can give patient on table absolute good result, so appreciable, and you are on high.
Yeah.
In 3 to 3.5%, rest 3 to 3.5%, you give partial results because of the problems, or whatever good result you give deteriorates over the period of time because of certain issues. In 1 to 1% test is the litmus test, I tell you again, which are because of your experience you can avoid those issues, because of your radiology you can sense, you can preempt those issues and avoid them, and in up to 1% of the problem nothing is in your hand. In spite of having done great job, believe me, you get a sorry figure. The reason is, there are certain things when you open the inner ear and things are beyond your control. You may come across a subclinical high drops. There could be uncontrollable, reaction of the inner ear leading to the vertigo, sensorineural hearing loss, long-term problem. You never know. And thirdly, you never know this unique architecture of the middle ear ossicle that is not same in every individual. I tell you an example. When Deepak has asked this question, in 1%, why I am saying is not beyond your control. Having done fantastic work on table and yet you are not getting long-term result, and the reason is very obvious. I have gone through lot of publication about it. Our ossicular chain system suspended in the middle ear is such unique, and it has several points the God has given us impedance, to dampen the sound, excess sound to the inner ear to give inner ear loss. Impedance, the dampening, number one at the level of tympanic membrane. Number two, and the most important to me, number two at the incudomalleolar joint, then incudostapedial joint, and out of all middle ear ligaments, the highest level of impedance is exerted by the annular ligament.
Annular, that's a magic actually.
Highest level of impedance out of all middle ear ligaments is exerted by annular ligament. The God has given us this system. So what happens? Once you, in a normal situation is different, as the sound comes, it is dampened by the incudomalleolar joint. The tympanic membrane and malleus goes medially, and that leads to movement at the incudomalleolar joint, and that is transferred to the incudostapedial joint. If that sound is not very high, that is easily transferred through that joint, and the IS joint again goes medially, and from that the stapes goes medially, and if it is not excessive, the annular ligament otherwise will restrict, and the stapes will go medially for few nanometers. This entire unique system is completely destroyed after this surgery, Now the new system has come in, piston with no annular ligament. What my point?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Except
yes,
when
yes.
you use the vein.
Now see what that's why the vein, that's what I was coming to. So now what happens? What happens
Vein
now?
is not a ligament.
Yeah, let me tell you the biomechanics. So what happens? Now the stapes is replaced by a piston. Otherwise earlier, the diameter of the whole diameter of the stapes 3.2 millimeter was going in and out, But for a very small movement, few nanometers. And now it is replaced by a piston with a very less diameter, 0.12 millimeter. For a 0.4 piston, the total diameter of the movement is 0.12 millimeter in place of 3.2 millimeter of the stapes. What my point?
Yes.
Yet we are getting good sound. Why? Because now the amplitude of the movement is more as compared to the amplitude of the movement of the stapes. The earlier the amplitude of the movement of the stapes was few nanometers, and now your piston is moving in and out much more. 0.3 millimeter means 300 nanometers, something like that. Like Ashim said, in extreme situation, 0.5 millimeter means 500 nanometers as compared to few nanometer of stapes. That's how it is compensated, that in spite of a very small hole, our sound qualities, what we hear is very good, because the movement amplitude is more. Now why I mention at this point, like Deepak asked, in certain patients, we don't have any control about the overall post-operative hearing and the long-term hearing loss, because this has been proven now in the orthopathology. You go to the Shuknet book. Over the period of time, the quality, the elasticity of these ligaments controlling these joints weakens. You never know who the patient you are operating, the quality of the ligament, what exactly it is. What my point?
Yeah.
What is the quality of incudomalleolar joint in long run? You know what happens in the extreme sound pressure when the incus, the tympanic membrane and the malleus comes medially, that entire sound is not transmitted to the inner ear. What is the first obstruction? Incudomalleolar joint. And what happens there? Coupling, reverse coupling.
Decoupling.
Recoupling, yes. The malleus goes in and the incus goes out. That is to counter that sound going inside. That is the coupling between the malleus and incus at the incudomalleolar joint, and so that the entire sound is not transmitted to destroy the inner ear. So that coupling is controlled by the incudomalleolar joint and the ligaments, and that is beyond of control. If I have operated a patient whose ligaments are so weak, what is going to happen? His piston will go unimpeded in and out, and the patient may get sensorineural hearing loss after a few months, and then patient will come and fall upon me. Doctor, you have ruined my life, that I have developed sensorineural hearing loss. My entire whatever hearing earlier was even is completely lost. That the fault is lying on the doctor. That's why we always take a consent. In up to 1% of the patients, nothing is in our control. There are so many reasons. I'll take you later on to a slide where I will show you so many reasons which are responsible for that unknown control of unknown hearing loss, which is beyond the control. So now the next point, Ashish, in the radiology, before I wrap up the radiology part, the next you need to look at the cochlea. Why at the cochlea? In the cochlea, you need to see if there is any otosclerotic focus in the cochlea. If the patient particularly having mixed hearing loss, if you find lot of cochlear destruction, then you have to take a call of associated medical management at the same time to prevent the bone resorption further, like the Ashim is always doing. We'll know about your protocol later about your medical management. I know sir was giving every patient sodium fluoride for at least 2 years. I don't know now. So we will get, we will know from you. So that is important. If you have a lot of otosclerotic foci destroying your cochlea, you have to take a call. That is important information pre-op on radiology. Second, in the far advanced otosclerosis, there is a lot of cochlear destruction. This information is pivotal. This information is so vital. If your cochlea is destroyed too much, to take a call of cochlear implant without wasting time. Otherwise, you will lose an opportunity to insert an implant later. So the radiology is again game changing. So all these things are important to be kept in mind. I will go to the case. Case is ready now. The first case for the surgery is ready now. And the last thing at this point of time, yes, there was a question about the jugular bulb. In few patients we have seen the high riding jugular bulb even crossing the round window, and that is something you have to be aware. If such situation is there, you have to be more prepared. It's not absolute contraindication. It depends upon your surgical expertise to handle that situation.
For annulus elevation, you have to be careful.
Yes, careful. So how you can see, this is the level of the cochlea, this is the level of the round window basal ton. See, and we don't see in this picture anywhere the jugular bulb.
Yes.
That means jugular bulb is too low. If I go lower down, see now the jugular bulb is coming into the picture. So now, if you really want to know how low is the jugular bulb from your round window, you have to go to the 3D picture. See this again. I will show you. Can you see this jugular bulb here?
Yes.
Let me take my cursor here. Okay. And now see the jugular bulb here in the coronal, upside down picture, to see the distance of the jugular bulb from the round window. See this, jugular bulb is here. Now if I run, see this. This is my round window and this is the level of the jugular bulb. See how far it is. This is round window here.
Very far. Yeah, correct.
And this is jugular bulb, and I can measure. So this is to make your life easy. See, all these measurements help you in planning your. It is 8 millimeters. It is miles away, I would say, as far as the jugular bulb is concerned, from the round window. So all these things are important. You need to sit with CT scan for at least half an hour before planning otosclerosis surgery. And all these points I have mentioned are specifically related to the otosclerosis. We will see the CT scan differently when next week on Thursday we will take up a case of cholesteatoma with facial palsy. Then the things we'll look at the CT scan will be altogether different than what we have seen today. In spite of all this, in spite of all this, having a normal CT scan, for that matter, Ashish, absolute normal CT scan, still we
yes.
can find problems because
Yeah.
we don't know the ultrastructural architecture at the membranous level. You know
Sure. Yeah.
what we are seeing in the morphology, the bony morphology, not at the membranous level, and that you can come across still intraoperatively. So, in few minutes of the time, I'll be back with a microscopic picture, and in a few minutes. And meantime, Dr. Sanjay Khanna, boss,
Yes.
yes, you can take questions. Yes, boss.
Message for all those who are viewers, more than 5,000-6,000, and all this 2-hour discussion is, I think, more than you cannot find all these points in any given books in the literature everywhere. So I think I request everyone to go through again in the evening and just find out what the content being discussed right now in 2 hours, and that will be worth for all of, I think, those who are viewers and those who are going to see the recording again.
Okay, boss, but my radiology is not over.
I know.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I will show you.
Revision, but that later, no, Satish.
I will show you something which is very important. I tell you. Why
Can you hear
I
me?
mentioned in the beginning about the MRI. This is game changing, I tell you, MRI, and for the regions, and we are in the process of studying this particular thing on MRI, how it can benefit us as an information which can be vital. Like Dr. Ashim said in the beginning, or I mentioned as well, the subclinical high drops. You know, certain patients have subclinical high drops. And what happens in those patients with no symptoms preoperatively or vertigo or anything? If you have a symptom of vertigo, tinnitus, hearing loss, that can warn you of something going wrong in the inner ear. But absolutely silent symptomatology, yet you open the vestibule, do your fenestration, your piston insertion, come out absolutely asymptomatic, and a post-op patient has a terrible problem with vertigo and sensorineural hearing loss. And the reason was the subclinical high drops. How you can pick up? By means of MRI, because now it is a soft tissue in the inner ear that cannot be picked up by CT scan. And the investigation of choice we take in our practice, if I can show you, let me, is this? Okay, so what do we do in MRI in those patients? There is a specific sequence of MRI in those patients, what we call it as a contrast MRI after IV gadolinium injection. Let me take you directly to that. Yes. What is that? You can easily understand, and for what patient it is required. You know, advocating MRI to every patient of atherosclerosis is not practical. You can, you understand it very well.
Yes. It's
Ashish, every patient of atherosclerosis, you cannot get MRI done. But there are certain subset of patients, because at the same time you have to understand that nothing is in your hand every time. You never know what is going on inside 100%. So if those patients who are very particular about the sensorineural hearing loss, a chunk of patients coming to us with atherosclerosis disease for surgery, their first question, doctor, I have read on Google that my whatever residual hearing can go completely with this surgery. What will you say? Yes, it can, but in a small subset of patients. And those patients, that region is beyond my control. So my result, I can tell you, is over 98%. And that is equivalent to the best results in the world. That's what you can say to your patient. But that 1%, 1.5% is not in your hand. So those patients who are more concerned, you can order this investigation. In our series, we have now over 60 patients we have got done this and got amazing findings in 3 patients, you know. So what is this investigation? By means of which you can pick up subclinical high drops preoperatively. What is that? So in this investigation of MRI, we inject IV gadolinium, and after 4 hours of injection of the IV gadolinium, we take the MRI scan, and that is FLAIR image, fluid inversion image. So in that, what we do, See this picture. What are you seeing in this picture? Some funny things on this picture. What is this? See, after 4 hours of gadolinium injection, the gadolinium is preferentially taken up by perilymph, not by endolymph. So the perilymph will appear hyperintense, and endolymphatic space will appear hypointense. Now see in this patient, these two patients, can you see here the hyperintense perilymph?
Yes.
Any dilated endolymphatic space you find here? No.
No.
Can you see on this side? Can you see on this side? This is perilymphatic space, and see the dilated endolymphatic spaces. Can you see this?
Yes.
That is good enough to tell this patient has a ongoing endolymphatic hydrops. And if such patient you take up for surgery, what is going to happen? Absolutely, such majority of such patients remain asymptomatic. You open the vestibule, you put your piston, and you happen to rupture the membranous labyrinth, which is already dilated, which you are not knowing. If you know by means of this investigation pre-operatively, with this dilated perilymphatic space, if I get such patients, see this, how much of the dilated space as compared to this side, I would never operate this patient in my life. That will be a disaster on my name that I have given a complete sensorineural hearing loss to this patient. So these are certain things you can avoid by means of using the help of this radiological information. So those patients, yes.
No, go ahead, complete this.
Those patients who are too concerned about sensorineural hearing loss, those have Googled enough earlier, gone to several doctors with a fear of losing the residual hearing after this surgery, you can advocate this investigation. Let us see what is happening inside. Let me see what are the chances and get this investigation done. If I find this patient this kind of a picture, now I will strongly advocate you have a very less chances of having any disaster. But having this kind of a picture, I would say better stay away and use a hearing aid.
Yes.
Now Ashish, yes.
Satish, a role for, you've done the surgery and the patient lands up with vertigo on the same day. Is there any role for imaging in such patients? The pneumolabyrinth and,
yes,
on day 1, day 10 and...
Yes, that's valid, very important. Not day 1. Obviously, the patient develops vertigo or sensorineural hearing loss if you do a Weber's test or whatever. And that too on, uneventful step-piece surgery,
Yes, when the surgeon believes everything was fine.
So first management is obviously a conservative one with a steroid, antibiotic, and that will learn from Ashim. He has a huge protocol for this.
Yeah.
But if it goes, uncontrolled.
So just role of imaging, since you are here, I just wanted to...
Imaging has an immense role. Number 1, by means of imaging, both CT and MRI, you get a lot of information. By CT scan, you can get to know how deep your piston is inserted inside the vestibule. Many a time, unknowingly, if your piston has gone too deep to damage the membranous labyrinth, you can get to know very easily by a CT scan. Though it overestimates by a fraction of millimeter, but still it is very useful. And those patients you can immediately take up for re-exploration, remove the piston, put a vein graft and put another piston of adequate length. Secondly, with a persistent this kind of a feeling, you have a suspicion of a perilymph fistula then. Then again your imaging can give you help. On CT scan, if such patient with this persistent problem after 7 days, on CT scan what you will find? The pneumolabyrinth, the air in the labyrinth. See, the moment you open the labyrinth, the air will be there.
There has to be air, yeah, correct.
You get the CT scan, next day done, the air will be there, definitely. Yeah. But it will not persist for 7 days. If it persists for 7 days or beyond, that is a definite indication of a perilymph fistula. And same thing you can get on an MRI, a heavily T2-weighted MRI, where the fluid of the inner ear, because the middle ear doesn't have any fluid. Middle ear doesn't have any fluid. Any fluid in connection with the fluid in the inner ear flowing in the middle ear, that is a direct evidence of a fistula. And then you have to take a call. Any more questions, Sanjay sir? Ashish,
Many questions are there.
Yes, please.
Related to this investigative part, radiology.
Yeah.
Can you comment on monopodal stapes? This is by Dr. Sandeep from Pune.
Monopolar?
Monopodal.
That is an anomaly, you mean to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of anomalies, you know, they are very uncommon. Some anomalies you will find a different, you know, architecture of the stapedial arch. Sometimes both screws are very close to each other. Yeah, sometimes the incudostapedial joint completely, you know, fused. Sometimes the neck is absent. Sometimes all these are, they can happen.
Typically, the stapedius is also absent, and maybe the pyramidal process is also.
Yes.
Usually, monopodal will be accompanied by also an absence of the stapedial muscle.
Yes.
Another question is from Professor Sunil from Jaipur. Comment on malignant autosclerosis.
Malignant autosclerosis? I don't know what it is.
You see, the malignant autosclerosis is probably
advanced autosclerosis.
Yes, yeah, given the term to the far advanced autosclerosis by some people.
Far advanced autosclerosis.
So the definition of far advanced autosclerosis, by definition, it is when the air conduction threshold is above 85 dB with no measurable bone conduction, and on CT scan you will find lot of confluent lesions on the in the cochlea of cavitation of the autosclerosis involving the otic capsule.
Yeah.
We will discuss now FAO in more detail.
Yeah, we'll discuss later the indication of cochlear implant stapes in detail later.
Where is the surgery now, Satish? Where are you?
This is beginning, boss. This discussion is going to go long.
No,
yes,
no,
any more? Yes, question, boss.
So next question is from Dr. Jagdish from Oman.
Yes.
What is your in your series? What is the incidence of round window obliteration?
By autosclerosis.
By autosclerosis.
Ashi or Satish take that.
You can take it. Dr. Ashi.
I would say less than 1%.
Boss, can you repeat the question?
What is the incidence of round window obliteration?
Because of the sclerosis.
Yeah, up to 1 to 2%.
Less than 1% in my series.
Obliteration is asking, not just presence of the focus. That
whatever incidence reported in the literature is underestimation because of not getting CT scan done so frequently. The actual incidence is higher, though it may not be contributing to the hearing loss in all cases. You know,
correct.
The round window involvement of the autosclerosis is whatever reported as compared to that is quite high, but not giving problem clinically.
Not giving a clinical, yeah.
Yeah, इधर लाना mic. Mic इधर लाओ. Yes, any more questions?
Yeah, there are many more.
Go ahead.
It is related to CI, again in advanced autosclerosis that we will discuss, I think, later on.
Yes.
Just a minute. So this is from Ahmedabad, Dr. Jamin. In case of subclinical endolymphatic hydrops, will vein graft interposition help?
Yes, always.
The problem here with subclinical endolymphatic hydrops is at the point of fenestration. There can be an issue with a dilated saccule. So that is what we are afraid of more than anything else.
Yeah, but still vein graft will help to prevent fistula.
With that, assuming that you have no damage to the saccule at the point of fenestration, vein graft is always preferred. So in those cases, even with non-endolymphatic hydropic distension of the labyrinth, of the saccule, even in cases with otosclerosis with vertigo, which is non-Meniere's, those also vein graft is important. Because otosclerotic vertigo is a well-known clinical entity in and of itself.
There is another question from Dr. Ravi Mayer, New Delhi. The role of CT densitometry in otosclerosis.
Yes, CT densitometry is another investigation. The reason is, though it is not very useful in a regular practice, but yes, it gives information about the density of the bone to diagnose otosclerosis. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
So, as I mentioned, this otosclerotic bone is relatively hypodense to the normal aortic capsule bone.
Yes.
So by means of densitometric changes, you can pick up the involvement of the aortic capsule wherever it is because of this autosclerosis. Normally what happens? Normally, whatever our aortic capsule is formed in the embryo, finally, it never goes any changes throughout the life. Never. Whatever it is, it remains like this for life, and it is not vascular. In autosclerosis process where it starts, it leads to these changes of spongiosis and sclerosis all the time. Bone resorption, bone lamination. That is what going on, and that you can pick up by bone densitometry wherever it is going on.
Yes.
So
coming to
another
the surgery.
question is,
Sorry.
yeah,
No,
इससे
please
बड़ा-
go ahead.
एक size बढ़ा दे.
yeah,
Next
from
slide,
Dr. Ramkesh from Savai Madhapur. If HRCT is not available, can we check this malleolar ligament fixation?
हटाओ उसको.
Clinically, of course, at the time of surgery, that is the best way to check it any which ways, because
Yeah.
It is per operative.
Boss,
even
Ashim,
there's no
Ashim.
other way of doing it pre-operatively.
Ashim,
Yes.
can you tell in detail about this annular ligament? How do you check?
Okay, fine. So what happens is that when Satish will take the incision, Satish will not take that standard 12 to 6 o'clock incision, but he'll go anterior to about 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, yeah.
This concept of checking the anterior malleolar ligament has been brought into vogue by Professor Hugo Fish because of the work done by Fish, Alex Huber, and Carl Bernd Huttenbrink in Dresden at that time. So what happens is that he will then expose the anterior malleolar ligament at the primary part for the incision
उसको
itself.
बुला. वीरू
Because
को.
that is part of the checklist of exposure.
वीरू को बुला, लाइट आ रही है.
Now, when
कहाँ
you
चल
want
जाता
to
है
check the anterior malleolar ligament, the way to do it is after disarticulation of the
लाइट बहुत जा रही है अंदर. हाँ.
because you want to
कर
take
कर.
away the movement, the rigidity of the stapes when you are assessing the
वाइट
malleus.
बैलेंस करें क्या?
So after you disarticulate,
Can you please repeat this?
yeah. So the after you elevated and observed it, the anterior malleolar ligament by elevating up to 2 o'clock in this case, for example, what you need to do is after disarticulation of the incudostapedial joint, then and only then can you truly assess the movement of the malleus. And assessment of the malleus is to be done at the neck, not at the handle. Most people press on the handle of the malleus,
Yeah.
but what we recommend is touching the neck of the malleus in order to judge how flexible that part is. Now, when you, by touching the neck of the malleus, you see adequate excursion of the long process of the incus, then you know that it is not fixed. Now, what we do is sometimes you have hyalinization also. Not real fixation, not real ossification. And we do intraoperative audiometry in each and every case. And at the end of the procedure, if I find that the intraoperative audiometry is not up to mark, I will go ahead
पकड़ना
and
इसको.
cut the
पकड़ना.
anterior malleolar ligament any which ways. And later on, if I have the opportunity, I will show you a couple of slides in which I have seen a 5 to 10 decibel improvement on table itself.
After
So it is
cutting that
something
ligament.
it is underreported, underestimated, and most of us who have a 5 to 10 or 15 decibel residual airborne
पकड़िए.
gap at the end of the procedure, by far, I'm sure it's due to the anterior malleolar ligament. more than anything
Boss,
else.
boss.
Yes, boss.
But this incidence is relatively high, particularly in autosclerosis situation or in general?